You mentioned the point as far as, managing the categories, right? And like a
Yeah.
lot of us here say that run horizontal marketplaces, that it's almost like running multiple marketplaces within one, right? Across the
It
categories.
is.
So since
Mm-hmm.
there's so many at Upwork, how did you think about managing the categories? And then, maybe what's, one kind of like example of how nuanced, that they might be?
Mm-hmm. So I think the most important thing, I think org structures, goals, like all of those things can change, but the most important thing is understanding them. And so what you don't want to do is just assume, just always run the average metric and then decide, well, this is obviously applies to everywhere. And so just understanding, like we built out the dashboards of the different metrics and what they look like for these different categories. When we would run A/B tests, we would often run cuts for different categories. Sometimes we would run tests just in a category versus others. And so I think that is the number one thing. I think if you do understand them, then you do have the ability to track and to look at these different sub marketplaces, if you will, differently, that unlocks every other decision that you make. And so I think that's kind of the number one thing to focus on. One example of where we saw difference there, I think the biggest, if you think about, let me actually talk about a different set of sub marketplaces. So there's sort of short-term jobs versus long-term jobs. And so within graphic design, for example, there are many things that you could think of that would be maybe like an hour or less. And there are many things that you could think of that would be 6 months to 12 months. And so those are in their own ways sub marketplaces. And it's almost like sub marketplaces, depending how you do it. But there are really a lot of similarities, more similarities, I would say, across like a long-term graphic design job and a long-term customer service job than there are between a 1 hour customer, design job and a 6 month design job. And so that is sort of just another angle. We definitely have, I think the biggest difference was just in terms of the client hiring behavior and what they were looking for. It's really, if you're going to spend less than $100 on something, it's pretty low risk, pretty easy to make a decision. If you're going to hire someone and integrate with them with your team, you just care so much more about that experience. And so the product experience, for example, if you post a job and you see the recommendations and we kind of take you through the flow, was more optimized for the single kind of short-term job world where you sort of like, let's chat with a few people and decide based on not very much information who I'm going to hire, and then like have them do the job in 24 hours and come back to me. And so a lot of the work that we did was understanding those personas and needs a little bit differently, and then giving a lot more guidance to the longer term job clients as they were hiring to make sure that they are treating it just like an employee, right? Like interview a couple people, give them a test project. Those types of things were some things that we saw our best clients say, the clients who had really figured it out. And so sharing that information with more people was really important to sort of enable that wider range of activity within the platform.